Once upon a time, in a cozy little cottage that had seen better days, lived a boy named Jack. Now, Jack wasn't a bad lad, not really. His main occupation, however, was an expert-level appreciation of leisure. When the sun blazed, Jack basked like a contented cat. When winter nipped, he'd be found practically a permanent fixture by the hearth, probably dreaming of sunnier days. His poor old mother, bless her heart, toiled away at her spinning wheel, her sighs often louder than the whirring spindle, all while Jack perfected the art of doing absolutely nothing. Days turned into weeks and Jack's laziness became legendary, at least to his mother. "Jack, could you fetch some water?" Silence, punctuated by a snore. "Jack, the firewood's low." The gentle crackle of the hearth was his only reply. She'd try everything, gentle coaxing, stern requests, even the odd theatrical sigh that could rival a Shakespearean tragedy. But Jack remained unmoved, a monument to inertia. His mother's patience, unlike Jack's commitment to comfort, was a finite resource, and it was wearing thinner than her well-darned stockings. Oh, the drama brewing in that humble abode. The journey home was sloshy. With every step, milk glugged and slopped inside his pocket. By the time he reached his cottage, the jar was mostly empty, his jacket was entirely drenched, and he left a milky trail like a very confused snail. "Dear me," cried his mother, surveying the soggy mess that was her son. "You should have carried it on your head, like the milkmaids do." Jack, dripping but undeterred, mentally filed away this new piece of information. "I'll do so another time," he declared, wringing out his sleeve. Thursday dawned and Jack, ever optimistic, set out again. "On my head," he muttered, practicing his balance. He hired himself to another farmer, a jovial chap with a magnificent mustache who was renowned for his cream cheese. After a day spent mostly chasing escaped chickens, which wasn't actually his job, but Jack got easily sidetracked, the farmer, chuckling, gave him a large, round, wobbly cream cheese for his troubles. Jack eyed the cheese, then his head. This was his moment to shine, or at least not to spill. Remembering his mother's precise instructions, "Carry it on your head," Jack carefully, very carefully, placed the cream cheese atop his tousled hair. It wobbled precariously. He took a tentative step. So far, so good. He started his journey home, walking with the stiff, exaggerated care of a tightrope walker who'd misplaced his pole. Passers-by gave him curious looks, but Jack was focused. Head, cheese, home, the mantra of the moment. He was a moving monument to dairy-based determination, albeit a rather unstable one. Alas, the sun was warm and the cheese was creamy, very creamy. By the time Jack reached his cottage, the cheese had taken on a new, more impressionistic form. Part of it had melted down his face, part of it was artfully, or rather disastrously, tangled in his hair, and a good chunk had simply vanished, perhaps absorbed by the atmosphere. "You stupid lout," his mother groaned, looking at the cheesy, sticky apparition that was her son. "You should have carried it very carefully in your hands." Jack, now sporting a unique dairy hairdo, nodded. "I'll do so another time." Friday arrived. "Carefully in my hands," Jack rehearsed, wiggling his fingers. He found employment with a baker, a plump, flour-dusted man with a twinkle in his eye. The bakery was warm and smelled divinely of fresh bread. Jack's job involved sweeping up flour, which mostly resulted in him creating small, localized flour blizzards. For his efforts, the baker, perhaps as a joke or perhaps because he had a surplus, gave Jack a large, rather grumpy-looking tomcat. "Fine mouser," the baker declared. Jack wasn't so sure about the fine part. Jack, remembering his mother's latest instruction, "Carry it very carefully in your hands," cradled the tomcat as if it were made of spun glass and dynamite. Pussy, initially surprised by this gentle treatment, even purred for a moment. Jack beamed. This was working. He was finally getting the hang of this carrying things business. He set off, the cat nestled in his arms, a picture of domestic if slightly bewildered harmony, for about 5 minutes anyway. Then Pussy decided he'd had enough of careful cradling. Suddenly, the purring stopped. The cat, with the agility of a seasoned ninja, began to squirm, then wriggle, then unleash a flurry of scratches that would make a wolverine proud. "Ouch, eek, yow," yelped Jack, his careful hold turning into a frantic juggle. The cat, sensing freedom, made a daring leap and vanished into the bushes, leaving Jack with stinging arms and a deep sense of feline betrayal. When he got home, his mother surveyed his scratched hands. "You silly fellow, you should have tied it with a string and dragged it along after you." "I'll do so another time," Jack mumbled, nursing his wounds. Saturday, Jack, armed with a piece of string and his mother's latest advice, felt oddly confident. He hired himself to a burly butcher with a booming laugh who owned a shop filled with impressive cuts of meat. After a day spent mostly trying to avoid slipping on the sawdust floor, the butcher, impressed by Jack's sheer persistence, or perhaps just wanting him out of the way, rewarded him with a handsome, hefty shoulder of mutton. Jack eyed the mutton, then his string. This was it, foolproof. With grave seriousness, Jack tied the string firmly around the shoulder of mutton. "Drag it along after you," his mother had said, and so drag it he did, through dusty paths, muddy puddles, over rough stones, and past a very interested pack of stray dogs who viewed Jack as a mobile feast provider. Jack, oblivious, simply focused on the task at hand, dragging. He was a parade of one, with a rather unfortunate-looking meaty float trailing behind him, gathering an impressive coating of everything. By the time Jack reached home, the handsome shoulder of mutton was, to put it mildly, no longer handsome, or particularly mutton-like. It was a sorry, dirt-caked, unrecognizable lump. His mother, who had been planning for a decent Sunday dinner, took one look and her patience finally snapped like an overwound clock spring. "You ninny hammer," she cried, utterly exasperated. "You should have carried it on your shoulder." Jack, gazing at the ruined meat, simply replied, "I'll do so another time." Tomorrow was, after all, another day, for work anyway. Finally, one crisp Monday morning, as the rooster crowed with rather judgmental enthusiasm, Jack's mother reached her breaking point. "Jack," she declared, her voice sharper than a new needle, "this lazing about ends today. If you don't start working for your porridge, and I mean actual, sweat-inducing work, then out you go. You can find your own sunbeams to bask in and your own hearths to hog." The ultimatum hung in the air, as serious as a tax collector. Jack, mid-stretch, froze. Porridge, work, the concept seemed alien to his very being. This was serious business. And so Monday rolled around again. Despite a week of escalating disasters, Jack, bless his cotton socks, was back at it. His resilience, if not his common sense, was truly remarkable. This time he hired himself to a cattle keeper, a weather-beaten man with a kind smile who had a variety of livestock. For his day's work, which involved a lot of staring at cows and trying to understand their moos, the cattle keeper decided to reward Jack with a donkey. A whole live four-legged, long-eared donkey. Jack looked at the donkey looked at Jack. An unspoken understanding passed between them, mostly confusion on both parts. Then Jack remembered his mother's last instruction, uttered in a moment of peak frustration over the ruined mutton. "You should have carried it on your shoulder." Right, on his shoulder. A donkey. This was, by far, the most challenging interpretation of maternal advice yet, but Jack was nothing if not obedient in his own uniquely literal way. He began to strategize. Hoisting a live, somewhat reluctant donkey onto one's shoulder is not, as it turns out, a simple task. There was a lot of grunting from Jack, a fair bit of indignant braying from the donkey, and a considerable amount of awkward maneuvering. The donkey, clearly not a fan of airborne travel, did not make it easy, but Jack, driven by the sheer power of misunderstood instructions, persevered. After a heroic struggle that probably deserved its own ballad, he managed it. The donkey was on his shoulders. And so Jack began his slow, unsteady journey home, a truly bizarre spectacle. There he was, staggering along the path, with a bewildered donkey draped over his shoulders like a very large, furry, and occasionally kicking scarf. The donkey's legs stuck up comically in the air, its head bobbed near Jack's, and its tail swished with mild indignation. Jack, meanwhile, was a picture of strained determination, focused solely on transporting his prize according to the misinterpreted rules. Passers-by stopped, stared, and probably questioned their sanity. Let's take a moment to appreciate this tableau. A young man, not known for his brawn, carrying a fully grown, albeit small, donkey. The donkey, for its part, seemed resigned to its fate, perhaps pondering the strange ways of humans. Jack's face was a mask of exertion, sweat dripping, muscles screaming in protest. Yet he plodded on, a testament to filial obedience, however misguided. The sheer absurdity of it was monumental. One might even call it performance art if one were feeling generous. Mostly, it was just plain hilarious. Now, it just so happened that along this very road stood a grand house. In this house lived a very rich man and his only daughter. She was a beautiful young lady with everything a heart could desire except for two things: her hearing and her voice. She was deaf and dumb and had been so all her life. Doctors had come from far and wide, consulted dusty tomes, and prescribed peculiar potions, all to no avail. They had finally declared that she would never speak or hear until something or someone made her laugh. Inside, the young lady sat by her window, gazing out with a melancholic air. Life for her was a silent film, beautiful but muted. Her wealthy father watched her with a heavy heart, willing to give his entire fortune for a single chuckle from his beloved child. Learned physicians in serious-looking robes would visit, shake their heads gravely, and depart, leaving behind only deeper silence and dwindling hope. Today was like any other day, filled with quiet longing and the rustle of expensive, unheard silks. As fate would have it, the young lady happened to be looking out her window, her gaze drifting idly across the landscape. It was a familiar view, one she'd seen 1,000 times. Trees, fields, the distant road, nothing ever really changed. She sighed, a silent breath in her silent world, her fingers tracing patterns on the cool glass. Little did she know, the universe was about to send something entirely new, entirely unexpected, and entirely ridiculous her way. And then into her line of sight staggered Jack, with the donkey on his shoulders, legs sticking up like 4 furry flagpoles. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the image was beyond anything she had ever conceived. A man carrying a donkey. Like a sack of potatoes, a very surprised, long-eared sack of potatoes. It was illogical, it was preposterous. It was utterly, delightfully, unexpectedly comical. For the first time, a genuine emotion flickered across her usually placid features. Utter disbelief. Something twitched at the corner of her lips, a tiny, unfamiliar sensation. Then a small sound escaped her, like a bird testing its wings. It grew, bubbling up from deep within, a feeling she had never known. The sight of Jack, so earnest in his ridiculous endeavor, the donkey so passively enduring its indignity, it was too much. She burst into a great, heartfelt peal of laughter, loud, clear, and utterly joyous. And as she laughed, the world opened up. "Look," she cried, pointing, "a man carrying a donkey." She could speak, she could hear. Jack blinked once, twice. Surely she was joking. Mother, the purveyor of porridge and mender of socks, banishing him. He tried a charming, sleepy smile, usually good for a second helping of stew. It bounced off her stony expression like a rubber ball. He then attempted to look incredibly busy inspecting a loose thread on his tunic. That didn't fly either. The reality began to sink in. The gravy train of glorious idleness was pulling into its final station. Panic, a most unwelcome and energetic emotion, started to flutter in his chest. Her father, hearing the miraculous sound of his daughter's laughter and then her voice, rushed into the room, his heart pounding. Doctors, who had been gloomily sipping tea in another chamber, came running, their Eeyorish expressions replaced with astonishment. There she was, his daughter, chattering and laughing, her face radiant. The joy in that room was palpable, bouncing off the expensive wallpaper. The rich man was so overcome with happiness he nearly danced a jig, much to the further surprise of the medical professionals. The rich man, ecstatic, learned of the cause, the sight of Jack and his donkey. He immediately sent servants to fetch this unwitting hero. Jack, by now completely exhausted and very confused about all the sudden attention, was brought before him, the donkey finally and gratefully on solid ground. The father, true to a promise he'd made long ago that whoever made his daughter laugh and speak would marry her, offered Jack his daughter's hand and, naturally, a hefty portion of his fortune. Jack just blinked, utterly bewildered but not entirely displeased. And so, lazy Jack, the boy who couldn't carry a penny without losing it, married the beautiful and now very chatty heiress. The wedding was a splendid affair, though Jack did accidentally trip over the bride's train and almost set a curtain on fire with a misplaced candelabra. But everyone was too happy to mind. He was now a rich gentleman, living in a grand house, proving that sometimes a little bit of well-intentioned, literal-minded silliness can lead to the most extraordinary of fortunes. Of course, Jack didn't forget his long-suffering mother. He brought her to live in the grand house, where she traded her spinning wheel for silken cushions and her worries for endless cups of tea. She spent her days in comfortable amazement, occasionally shaking her head at Jack's continued, though now harmless, oddities. No more scolding about porridge or misplaced earnings. Her boy, her lazy Jack, had somehow, in the most roundabout way imaginable, made good, very good indeed. And they all lived happily, if somewhat eccentrically, ever after. Jack, now Mr. Jack to most, never quite lost his lazy streak, but now he had staff to fetch things. He'd often be found napping in the extensive palace gardens, perhaps dreaming of donkeys and cheese. His wife adored his simple nature, and his mother finally got the rest she deserved. And all because Jack, in his own unique way, took things one step, one item, one hilariously literal interpretation at a time. The end. With a sigh that could power a small windmill, Jack reluctantly agreed. The prospect of fending for himself was, frankly, terrifying. He shuffled out of the cottage, looking as prepared for a day's labor as a fish for a bicycle race. He squinted at the bright world, a world full of effort. Where does one even find this work she spoke of? He ambled down the path, his usual leisurely pace now tinged with a hint of dread and the unfamiliar sensation of purpose. This was going to be an adventure, albeit a rather unwelcome one. After much aimless wandering and perhaps a short nap under a tree, old habits die hard, Jack stumbled upon a neighboring farmer. This farmer, a sturdy fellow with hands like spades, needed help in his fields. Jack, trying to look industrious, mostly got in the way, mistook a scarecrow for a fellow worker, and somehow managed to trip over his own feet an impressive number of times. The farmer, more amused than annoyed, paid him a shiny penny for his days, well, for his presence mostly. Jack was astounded. A whole penny, his very own. Jack had never possessed money before. It was round, it was shiny, it was magical. He held it up to the light, turned it over and over, and grinned like a fool. This work thing wasn't so bad if it resulted in such treasures. He imagined all the things a penny could buy, perhaps a lifetime supply of naps. Fueled by this newfound wealth, he started his journey home, the penny clutched tightly in his hand, a symbol of his first foray into the world of honest labor. Now Jack wasn't used to carrying valuables. As he skipped, over a babbling brook, feeling rather pleased with himself, the penny, eager for its own adventure, slipped from his grasp and plopped right into the water. Plink, gone just like that. When he arrived home, penniless and crestfallen, his mother sighed. "You stupid boy," she exclaimed, though with a hint of resignation. "You should have put it in your pocket." Jack, ever the diligent student of maternal wisdom, nodded thoughtfully. "I'll do so another time," he promised, already forgetting the sting of his loss. The next day, Wednesday, found Jack slightly more determined. Pockets were the key, he mused. He found work with a local cowkeeper, a cheerful woman surrounded by a herd of rather opinionated cows. Jack's main task was to prevent Daisy, the prize-winning cow, from eating the cowkeeper's prize-winning petunias. After a day of surprisingly athletic redirection, mostly Jack dodging Daisy, he was rewarded not with a coin but with a large, cool jar of fresh milk. Aha, thought Jack, remembering yesterday's crucial lesson. This time he knew exactly what to do. Proudly, Jack took the jar of milk. He recalled his mother's sage advice, put it in your pocket. Now, Jack's jacket pocket was generously sized, perfect for storing, say, a forgotten sandwich or a collection of interesting pebbles. A jar of milk, however, was a different proposition entirely. With a grunt of effort, he managed to shove the entire jar into his pocket. It was a snug fit, a very, very snug fit. He patted his bulging pocket triumphantly and set off for home, confident he'd nailed it this time.